The title of this lecture is Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225. In 1230, his family sent him to study with the monks at the monastery on Monte Cassino. This is the same monastery that was founded by St. Benedict so many years ago. In 1236, he was sent to the University of Naples, where he studied the 7 liberal arts. In 1240, or somewhere between 1240 and 1243, Thomas entered the order of preachers, the Dominicans. Thomas's family was displeased with his decision to join the order of preachers. They had hoped he would undertake an ecclesiastical career and become an abbot or bishop of a powerful monastery or a powerful diocese. His brothers, who were members of the imperial army, kidnapped Thomas and imprisoned him in their own home for 2 years. In an effort to dissuade him from his religious vocation, they actually sent a prostitute into his room in an attempt to destroy his chastity. Thomas, it is said, drove her out with a branding iron taken from the fireplace. Not everyone opposed Thomas's vocation, however. His sister brought him books: Holy Scripture, the works of Aristotle, and the sentences of Peter Lombard. Now, the sentences of Peter Lombard were the standard medieval textbook for theology. After 2 years of imprisonment in his home, Thomas was set free to pursue his own vocation as a Dominican friar. In 1244 or 1245, he arrived in Cologne, in modern-day Germany. Here he studied under the Christian philosopher Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great. From Albert, Thomas learned the corpus of Aristotelian thought. In 1250, Thomas entered the priesthood. In 1251-1252, Thomas was sent to Paris to teach at the Dominican house at the university. At this time, Paris was the great center of theological study. In 1257, Thomas was awarded a doctorate in theology, and he continued to teach, debate, and write. In 1274, while on his way to the Council of Lyon, Thomas died. He was 49 years old. This is a classic portrait of St. Thomas Aquinas with his book in hand and his pen and ink. Called the great synthesizer of medieval Christian thought. He blended Christian faith and the philosophy of Aristotle in such a way and at such a time in history that he has become a monumental influence in Catholic theology. No one can claim to be a Catholic theologian without at least being familiar with Thomas's theology, and the same could be said for Catholic philosophy as well. Again, Thomas synthesized Christian doctrine with the philosophy of Aristotle. Before we get to Aristotle, however, we need to answer a very basic question. What is philosophy? Philosophy is, quite simply, the love of wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is a character trait or virtue involving, first, knowledge of things, then insight into the essence or nature of things, and finally, judgment of how best to apply knowledge and insight. Wisdom begins with knowledge but goes beyond it. It is the capacity for living well through the use of knowledge. All true philosophy wrestles with this fundamental question: what is the good life, and how do I achieve it? This is why we pursue wisdom in the first place, to achieve happiness, the good life. That is the heart of Aristotle's ethical philosophy as well. The goal of ethics is to achieve happiness, the good life. Two philosophers of ancient Greece were formative for philosophy in Western culture, Plato and Aristotle. Both had their own prescriptions for the good life and happiness. They agreed on the definition and nature of wisdom. Wisdom is discovered by knowing universals. Now, what are universals? They are the unchanging bases of all things that exist. A universal is that which makes something what it is. It determines the nature of a thing. For example, I am a man. My nature is determined by the universal man, or manness. We all have a concept of what man is, and we observe that I correspond to that universal concept. This is what we mean by universals. Plato and Aristotle agreed that wisdom was discovered by knowing the universals, for this is how we come to understand all that exists. We need to understand what exists if we are to order our lives properly and thus achieve happiness, the good life. For Plato, universals are eternal, unchanging, immaterial ideas which exist in the mind of God. The individual phenomena which we observe and experience are imperfect manifestations of these universal ideas. Therefore, for Plato, to achieve wisdom, one must grasp the universal ideas by reflecting upon the particular imperfect manifestations of these ideas, and then orient one's life according to the universals thus grasped. For example, if one wishes to understand what it means to be a good human being, one must first contemplate and grasp the universal idea of humanness, by reflecting upon the imperfect manifestations of this in individual human beings, hoping to rationally and even intuitively derive the essence of humanness from these. Then, based upon this discovery, this understanding, one models one's life according to this ideal, the ideal of humanness. For Aristotle, however, the universals are not spiritual entities that exist separately from the phenomena that reflect them. For him, universals are found in individual phenomena themselves. Therefore, to achieve wisdom, argues Aristotle, one must examine the phenomena of the created world and then rationally discover the nature of the phenomena by studying how they operate. This is a famous Renaissance painting titled The School of Athens. Pictured is virtually every philosopher known to the ancient world. At the center are Aristotle and Plato. This is the center detail showing Plato and Aristotle. Plato is on the left, pointing up toward God, indicating that knowledge is directed via the heights of intuitive contemplation of universals as they exist in the mind of God. Aristotle, on the other hand, is gesturing downward and out, stressing the need to study created individual phenomena. Given his stress upon finding the essences of things in particular phenomena, Aristotle's philosophy is characterized by an enormous breadth of subject matter. He wrote on logic, physics, metaphysics, ethics, politics, psychology, and anthropology. Many of these works were studied in the 13th century European universities. Thomas Aquinas would have studied them. Before Thomas's time, however, for the first 1,000 years of the Church, Christian philosophy was conducted in the Platonic model, derived primarily from Augustine. Plato provided, through Augustine, the philosophical template for Christian thought. Europeans at the time had a very limited access to Aristotle. Only his logic was widely known. In the 13th century, Latin translations of Aristotle's philosophical works began to make their way into Europe by way of Spain, which was dominated by Arab Muslims at the time. These works were actually Latin translations of Arabic translations of the Greek works of Aristotle. So you can imagine the kind of errors and inaccuracies that crept into the texts. Nevertheless, Christian thinkers now had an encyclopedic source for scientific knowledge on a wide variety of subjects. Thus, Aristotle's works made their way into the medieval university system, of which Thomas was a part. In his definitive works, the Summa Theologiae, Thomas explores nearly every conceivable theological issue through a process of questioning. He follows a series of steps. First, he posits the question. Next, he presents the position opposed to his own. Third, he quotes scripture to refute the opposition. And fourth, he presents rational arguments in defense of his own position. This is called the quaestio method, the method of posing a question. Now here, the issue Thomas addresses is, does God exist? That is the question he poses. Now Thomas, of course, is a Christian. Therefore, he believes that God exists. But first he presents the position opposed to his own, that God does not exist. The argument given is as follows. All that we see in existence can be accounted for by nature, without reference to God. Therefore, there is no need to suppose that God does in fact exist. Therefore, God does not exist. And again, this is not Thomas's position. This is the position of his hypothetical opponent, one who does not believe in God's existence. and Thomas extends them the courtesy of presenting their position first. Then Thomas provides his own answer. He argues that the existence of God can be proven in 5 ways: from motion, from efficient cause, from possibility and necessity, from the gradation found in things, and from the governance of the world. Notice how all these arguments are grounded in what we can observe in the natural order. Here we see the influence of Aristotle's philosophy. You begin with phenomena, watch how they operate, and draw inferences, logical inferences, from the operation of various phenomena. In this case, the various phenomena that operate in the universe. Let's take a look at Thomas's argument from motion. It proceeds as follows. We observe things in motion. This is obvious. Whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. Nothing truly moves itself. If that which puts something in motion is itself in motion, then it must be put in motion by something else, and so on. Thus we have a chain of motion. This chain of caused motion cannot go on to infinity, argues Thomas. Why? Because there would be no principle of motion, no engine, as it were, to produce the power that causes the motion. Therefore, there must be a first mover. And this first mover we call God. Take a look at Thomas's argument from the governance of the world. We could call this an argument from the observable order in the universe. We observe, argues Thomas, that things in nature, even non-intelligent things, act for an end or a goal. This is due to the observable fact that they always or almost always act the same way. They achieve their end or goal not by chance but by design. Nothing acts purely out of chance. When something, even an inanimate object like a stone, behaves a certain way, it is because it is in the object's nature to behave that way. You drop a stone, it falls to the ground because, according to Aristotle, it is the nature of the stone to fall to the ground. Non-intelligent things cannot design their own end. The end of non-intelligent things must be designed by an intelligent being. This intelligent being we call God. The theology of Thomas Aquinas changed the course of Catholic theology. It took a decidedly Aristotelian orientation. His thought became standard for Catholic theological education for the next 700 years. His theology and his philosophy fell into disfavor with certain modernist trends, but is now, thankfully, enjoying a revival.